There's a very good reason that victims and their families are so angry at the public broadcaster. Now, the ABC often quotes Hamas figures without scrutiny, without scepticism, as if these terrorists who are capable of mass murder would never ever fudge a spreadsheet. They hired and later sacked pro-Palestinian activist Antoinette Lattouf, who called for an investigation into the media organisations who reported on the infamous Opera House anti-Jew slurs. Let me repeat that. This person did an investigation with left-wing website Crikey, which asserted that the disturbing footage that you just saw outside the Opera House did not say gas the Jews, because Lattouf thinks it's much better that they actually said, where are the Jews? As if calls to hunt down Jewish people in Sydney just days after October 7 is so much better. And then the ABC hired her and then got into trouble for illegally firing her after realising their mistake. What a mess.
There seem to be many failings in the Lattouf matter. They should not have been lessons to the organisation, but they're a good reminder of the expectations and responsibility of the organisation to act appropriately in all such environments. It should have been done better, and it wasn't.
Has the ABC calculated what was the cost to the ABC, both internal cost and the use of external counsel and others regarding the matter?
Our external costs at this point of all of the components of that, I think, are now more than $2.5 million.
$2.5 million. And all this goes to culture at the ABC. It is a poorly run organisation with no standards or principles, no leadership, and most importantly, no accountability. Because if there was, then these comments by Laura Tingle would never have been published around the world.
Got nothing to do with religion.
And absolutely are radicalised. They were targeting Jews. It is anti-Semitic, but we are ascribing all sorts of things, right?
Yeah, their actions are not based on their religion.
That was the ABC's Global Affairs editor, Laura Tingle, on the ABC's flagship current affairs podcast, Politics Now. It was such a silly and reckless thing to do. The official charges, the allegations, which will be tested in court, completely disagree with that assertion. This is the official statement from the authorities. Police will allege in court the man engaged in conduct that caused death, serious injury and endangered life to advance a religious cause and cause fear in the community. Early indications point to a terrorist attack inspired by ISIS, a listed terrorist organisation in Australia. Well, I wrote to Managing Director Hugh Marks and the news boss Justin Stevens and asked if they would remove Tingle's reckless and dangerous comments, which contradict the charges. And Hugh Marks was too cowardly to even respond to me. Instead, one of his media hacks, Sally Jackson, sent me this along a snarky on-background comment about how I am misunderstanding Laura Tingle's oh-so-very intellectual argument. They wrote, Laura Tingle is a senior and highly experienced journalist whose role as the ABC's Global Affairs editor includes providing her assessment and analysis. The conversation on the podcast concerned terrorism and radicalisation, and the comment was about separating religion from radicalisation. Are you serious? Let's hear her comments again.
Their actions are not based on their religion.
She said it was nothing to do with religion. She was not making a nuanced argument about radicalisation. She stated, as a fact, it had nothing to do with religion. And at the same time, police are taking to court a case which specifically alleges the shooters wanted to advance a religious cause. The word religion was literally in their press release. And Hugh Marks stands by Tingle's comments. Think about that. If he won't sack her, the board should sack him. And there was another moment in that same podcast which really is telling. Tingle goes on to criticise the report by anti-Semitism Special Envoy Gillian Siegel, and he makes the argument that will make your blood boil.
Universities losing funding if...
The university's losing funding, PK, the ABC
Yes.
losing funding. Now, I mean, The ABC is not perfect, but this was about just monitoring the public broadcasters and the idea that if they didn't meet the test, they could lose funding. And essentially, it seems like, and there was a lot of commentary at the time, that basically she had gone beyond the terms of reference, that she was basically setting herself up as a regulator, and that it would be her who decided whether the ABC or universities were not doing the right thing.
They know. They know that if they were properly regulated, they would be stripped of funding so quickly. There's a reason why they campaign against the report. They call it problematic, and they actively resist pressuring the Labor government to not adopt the recommendations. Because if they are truly accountable for their bias at the ABC, they would be defunded by lunch. James, this is why the public is angry. There's been so many situations that the ABC has let down the Jewish community. And for time reasons, I had to stop there. But there are so many examples. There was the case when Anthony Albanese was going to go and declare Palestine a state. Hours before that, Hamas was executing its own people. It goes to the heart of the problem with declaring a region which is run by terrorists. They didn't even run the story. There is selection bias. There is a leadership issue. Is it time for the ABC to be stripped of funding?
I mean, just for that reason, yes. I mean, there's so many other reasons that would have the ABC stripped of its funding, but that's a pretty good one. If I can weigh in on Laura Tingle's comments there. Now, I think, I will be as generous to her as I can possibly be. Generosity, I don't think, would extend the other way, and say that in the course of live conversation, her words were supposed to say it's not the traditional or an acceptable interpretation of Islam that these suspects were on. And I agree with that. But the thing is that even in the statement, what they're doing isn't an interpretation of Islam, is to say that religion is at the heart of what we suspect happened. Because,
even the very fact of arguing that point makes it a point involving religion.
We knew then that police were alleging that there was an ISIS flag in the car. To say, because I think when you say, well, it's nothing to do with an interpretation of Islam, it's a cop-out to say that we don't need to have the follow-up conversation after that about, how influential is radical Islam in this country. And I just think you need to know that even if you say, well, there are people out there that aren't practicing a form of Islam that we would deem acceptable, is to say that there is a problem with an interpretation of that religion in the country. And I just think you can't cop out from that.
From a knowledge point of view, I mean, is she not trained the principles of sub judice? This is before the courts. They should take this down. She is stating in this podcast something which contradicts the case the prosecutor is going to be bringing.
Yeah.
This is an ongoing legal matter.
At least come out and clarify what you were trying to say then. But to say that,
they stand by it as arrogance. And look, them not talking to me, it's them not talking to the Australian public. It's nothing to do with whether I'm offended. I don't care. These people are awful. I don't care if they like me or not. But them not providing an explanation is them not providing the Australian people an explanation. Mia, let's bring you in. What do you make of all this?
Well, I couldn't agree with you more. I think the ABC shows complete contempt for the Australian taxpayer. I mean, just to put Laura Tingle in context here, I mean, the more she talks, the more she reveals herself for what she truly is, and that's not a journalist. She's an activist, plain and simple. Look at what she did. It was just a couple of years ago at the Sydney Writers' Festival where she declared that Australia is a racist country. Now, there was a public outcry against that. There were people all across the country calling for her to be sacked on the basis of those comments, and the outgoing managing director said that there were no sanctions necessary here because what she said was based in fact. So she's gotten away with this for a long, long time, and I think it's pretty ironic that someone who thinks that Australia is such a terrible country, it's such a racist country, that you still think it's okay then to benefit off taxpayer dollars that fund your lifestyle. She doesn't seem to have a moral problem with that, but can say such terrible things about our country. But at the end of the day, there is no accountability in the ABC, and I don't think there's ever been a more appropriate time to call for the ABC to be defunded. They should be privatised, and as simple as that, because they're not journalists. There is no journalistic integrity in the ABC anymore. They are fundamentally activists.
I completely agree. It's their ABC and they definitely know it. But now to our favourite interviewer, the ABC's Sarah Ferguson, who had this moment with former Liberal Treasurer Josh Frydenberg this week.
How do we not see this through a political lens. I mean, the case that you're making, a personal case against the Prime Minister.
I'm deeply offended by what you just said. I'm deeply offended.
Explain that.
And you know what? Mm-hmm. There was a man called Murray Watt who sits on the Labor front bench who tried to say that about a year ago. And then Labor ministers like Mike Kelly and others, hear me out, who came out and said exactly what I'm about to say, which is that is an insult. That is an insult to say that there's any political motivation in this.
It's a question.
No, Sarah, the reality is this. I'm an Australian who has to have personal security because my life is endangered in this country. And I was the treasurer of this country. My children go to a school where there are armed guards outside. When I visit a Jewish aged care centre, there are armed guards outside. When I send my kids to Jewish sporting clubs, there are police cars out there and police tape. How should we live with this? Why should we live with this? So if I'm not going to speak out, who is? If not now, when? If not me, who?
Powerful retort. And Sarah Ferguson, a rare back down as well. I think to her credit, she did keep it civil after that. But the act of asking that question, you only ask that question if you're meeting his actions and his words with a degree of cynicism that a man, he's got tears in his eyes, he's giving his community is being gunned down. And so what if he wants to make a return to politics? It's not substantive to the point around his integrity or morality. Of course he wants to change the laws because he wants to keep his community safe. And then so to ask that, there is this implicit undertone that you're only making such a big deal. There's only so much theatre around what you're saying. You're overhyping it because you're trying to claim power. And that's why he was offended. I think a lot of people missed that, saying, oh, well, he should be asked tough questions. It was the undertones that he was doing it from a point of being disingenuous. He was just doing it to get power.
Which I think would be one of the worst insults I could level at someone. To say that they're using the bodies of Australian people of his own religion, to relaunch a political career. I mean, imagine the sick individual that would do that. And to say that...
She would never ask that to someone on the left.
No, I don't think so. And to be honest, like... You think, who would we hear from after such an event? And Josh Frydenberg immediately comes to mind. This is one of the most influential Jewish politicians in Australian history. He's the former treasurer. He has been on the case of the government's inactivity on anti-Semitism for 2 years.
People on the left are scared of him. And that's where the cynicism, they said, oh no, he's going to come back. And he is very, very, very good.
It was the least surprising thing that Josh Frydenberg would give an impassioned speech on Bondi, and good on him for doing so. I cannot believe the level of cynicism you need. But also, it's just, I get it's the industry we work in, I get the media sees the world in one way, but to watch Josh Frydenberg's speech, to watch his outpouring of grief and go, what does this mean for the future of the Liberal Party? How would this affect politics? I mean, go outside and touch grass. Like, this is an emotional moment and we need to treat it as such. It's not a time for political scheming.
Yeah, get out of Ultimo. Well said. Mia, your thoughts?
Yeah, I couldn't agree more. And I think just to put this in context as well, this question was asked towards the end of the interview. And that's important because it almost implied that everything else Josh had already discussed at the start of the interview, you needed the viewer or the listener needed to kind of look at it with a politicised lens, which to me is just absolutely disgraceful. And this was the height of arrogance from Sarah Ferguson. She does this all the time to people on the centre-right, and she's very rarely held accountable for it. So I think good on Josh Frydenberg for actually standing up to her, because that's the only way to deal with a bully, and that's what she was doing in this interview. And I think it's a message that if anyone on the centre-right wants to waste their time going on the ABC, you have to be prepared to go there with a fight and actually hold them accountable. I could not believe that she would frame the interview with that question. And I just think, many times this week, the left has been asked to reflect on itself and say maybe perhaps acknowledge where leftist extremism can lead. And I think this interview just shows that many on the left have no intention of doing so.